How about with your siblings in the days afterwards? How did they respond?
They were my lifelines. They really were.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 226, and I have been speaking with a lot of NPEs the last couple of weeks, usually off the record. Sometimes people will email me, they'll message me on my social media profiles, and some people have even been calling me. And so I've been talking with NPEs almost every day. I just feel so connected with this community, and I'm so grateful for everyone that feels safe enough to share their story with me. And today I'm speaking with an NPE. Today I have on Pat. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Lily.
Have you listened to this podcast?
Yes, it was very helpful to me, and especially at the beginning of my journey.
That's what people say. I get a lot of people that they'll listen to many episodes in the beginning and then, when they start feeling okay, they kind of go away from it and maybe come back when they need it again. But that's what it's there for. And there's a lot of people listening right now that have just found out that they're an NPE. And so this is the right place to go.
I agree.
So, Pat, we're going to talk to you and get a feeling about what your NPE story was like. And first, let's just talk about what your childhood was like and who was in your raising family. And feel free to share anything else about yourself.
All right. I was raised with my mother and father. Now I know we would refer to him as my birth certificate father, but he's my father, and my mother, and I have three older siblings. And I was a good bit younger than my siblings. My oldest brother is 10 years older. Then the next one is 8 years older. And then my sister was 6 years older. And so my siblings were a big influence in my life. My parents both worked, and a lot of the responsibility of watching me while they were at work fell to them. And so they have always been more than just siblings, I would say, almost like another set of parents. And so there was that. So I was the youngest, and my parents, I would not say they had a happy marriage. I didn't really notice it a lot until they went through a divorce when I was about 8. But my older siblings, I guess because I had so much more to focus on being the youngest, they probably focused more on the relationship between the parents. And there was a lot of, it was just tumultuous and a lot of arguing. And looking back, I don't remember my mother seeming happy. But I was happy. I was a happy child, and I didn't see a lot of those problems. So that was my home life. And I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and I've always lived here, and I love it here. I love to travel, but I love where I was born and raised, and that's why I've never left. My parents have passed. I'm 69 now, and my parents have passed, and so that's the bad news. The good news is that when I found all of this out, they were already gone. So I didn't have to deal with a lot of their feelings, that I hear a lot of people having to deal with. But of course, I didn't get many questions answered.
Did your parents stay married?
No, they divorced when I was 8.
When you were 8 years old. Okay. Now, Pat, did you have any signs growing up that you were an NPE?
No, none at all. I was my father's child as far as I was concerned. He was tall. He was 6'1". I was taller than my sister and my mother. I'm 5'9". And, that's tall for a woman. My brothers were tall. That seemed right in line. So there was that. I looked a lot like my mother. So, I didn't stick out or anything. I never felt there was anything unusual, and I never had any inkling.
Yep, you never had any clue. So, how did you find out that you were an NPE?
Well, on that same note, my oldest brother he used to always say he didn't feel like our dad was his dad. He'd say that because my mother was very young. She was 16 when she got married and had him. And my dad had said some things after we were all grown, indicating that my mother wasn't faithful. And so he he didn't really look like either one of my parents. He just, you could see a little bit of a resemblance, but it wasn't like you could say he looks like my father or he looks like my mother. And so he just always had that feeling when we would always say, no, 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 you are, you're like his side of the family. But that was one of the reasons I took the test. Not the only reason, but I thought, well, this will put him at ease in that area, because he would even hypothesize who his father might be. They had all taken the test, my older three siblings, and for whatever reason, I was the last one. So my sister chose 23andMe, and I was kind of wanting Ancestry because one of my sons had tested on there. But, I went with them and I said, okay. So I went on 23andMe, and the day I got the results, I opened it up and I looked, and my closest relatives were my three siblings, and it said half brother, half sister. And, I'm 67. I just, this was not, not even in my radar. And I kept looking at it and I thought, this is some kind of mistake. So my husband came in a little bit and I said, look at this, because it was like I didn't trust my eyes. I wanted to see what he saw. And he said, that's crazy. That's wrong. Why don't you just do it again? And I said, I know. So I thought, well, let me call my sister. I wanted to see if they saw what I saw. And so she opened hers and she said, wow, that says half sibling. Now, mind you, the other ones were not. And so I said, well, Steve's, my husband, said it's a mistake. And I think I'm going to do this again. She said, well, Pat, DNA doesn't lie. And, that was hard.
Yeah.
So thought about it. Anyway, we chatted and she encouraged me and tried to make me feel better. But I'm still in disbelief. So I called the other brothers because I thought, they're going to open this up and see this, and I want to prepare them. And my oldest brother was like me. He said, this is wrong. Absolutely not. He even tried to go in and change it on the platform. By the time I spoke to both of my brothers, it was starting to sink in because they were all seeing what I was seeing. And, that was how I found out.
Oh, gosh, that must have been so hard. I'm glad you were able to get clarification right away from your siblings, and it sounds like your husband was there for you as well. But I can only remember that day of finding out and trying to piece it together and thinking that something is wrong.
Yes, definitely. Because, and looking back, I think that's the reaction, when I've heard so many podcasts, that's the reaction of many of us. But yet we think part of the test is right.
Yeah, right? Because it's a very sound science.
But not that part.
And it sounds like your brother, who had at some point questioned his parentage. It sounds like he was a full sibling with your other siblings, so he's
Yes, and
not
he
canon.
is my dad's. He is my
Oh,
dad's son.
oh my gosh. Okay. So, what did you do in the days after finding out?
You know, it was just such a blur. I was in such shock, and it was a grief that's the only way I can explain it. It was a grief. I grieved. I don't think I grieved so much for myself. I grieved for my dad. I thought about him, and I wondered if he knew, and there's no way of knowing, but he loved me. I was his baby. And, if he knew, he didn't care, so but I just was hurt for him. And then I thought about my children because I, was going to share this information with them. And I thought about all the people that I was related to or thought I was related to. And I looked at all of that differently. It was a very strange feeling, but the best way to describe my feelings were grief.
Exactly. And what were you feeling about your mom at that time? Because you weren't able to get any answers from her.
Well, I was very disappointed, very disappointed that she could do that. But, that was my initial thing. I was a little angry, not real angry, but just very disappointed. I knew that they didn't, and then that was proof. I don't think she loved my dad. I don't think she did. He loved her. So I did go through different stages with her, and then I looked at the situation because that was 1956, and whether she knew or not, she she really would have messed all of our lives up if she would have left him and been a single parent. That just was not acceptable back then,
Yeah.
and our lives would have been so different. So I looked at that and I thought, things worked out the way they should have.
Yeah.
And even though she did that, she made a mistake. And, I just learned to forgive her.
How about with your siblings in the days afterwards? How did they respond?
They were my lifelines. They really were. They would call me and check on me just, unusual, sometimes twice in a day. And, baby sister, we love you. You'll always be our baby sister. Nothing has changed. They were just all that reassurance. Now, we know things have changed, but that is what I needed to hear. And I'll have to say, all of this made me look at my family different. All of the players, my sons, they were unbelievable. They were upset as well. But everybody just sort of rallied behind me. And I'm not a needy person. I'm not one that really likes to rely on people, but I needed them and I allowed myself to do that. And they were there for me.
Did you have a change in your heritage at all, or from what you knew it was?
No, not really. There was some African American, a small percentage that, is not not on with my siblings. That's not unusual growing up in the South. So that probably wouldn't have raised any red flags, but that was different than my siblings. So, but I don't think that would have stuck out that much, because all of our DNA is a little bit unique. But yeah, but not. I couldn't say anything that caused me to feel differently about my ethnicity.
So, did you get any clues after looking at your results about who your biological father might be?
Not on 23andMe. I looked, now there was one person, because I kept looking, as most people I'm sure do, kept looking for the connections and who was related to me that was not related to my siblings. And so I found this one person that would have been like a nephew. And I did reach out to that person, and I regret doing it because I wish I could go back and clean it up a little bit. I just said, I took a test and I've had some unusual findings. It seems that my biological father is not who I thought he was, and I was hoping you could help me connect the dots. And I never heard from that person. I think that's pretty common. However, my oldest son had done ancestry back in like 2011. And he had told me about different things, about his ethnicity. That's why he did it, just to see, what his origins are. And so when he thought about that and he said, "Hey, let me look at mine." He never looked at his matches. So he began to look at the matches and he started asking me about different people. And I said, I've never heard of them. I don't know I don't know them. I don't know who is it. How are we connected? And he kept asking. I said, I am not going to know them. I don't know those people. Mm. So from that, it helped a little bit. But we went on and, I told them eventually after, this is probably a few weeks, I said, I don't think I'll ever know who my biological father is because of my age. And, they're not around. It's going to be hard to trace the DNA even. And I said, but I feel like y'all will, in your lifetime. So hopefully y'all will find out. But my oldest son, he did want some information about our health history. And he was very motivated to find out the answers. So I did go on then I finally did get my testing done on Ancestry just to do both. And I could kind of see some people that I thought, but I just couldn't, I didn't know what to do with the information. So I heard about search angels. So I contacted a search angel, and I'm going to tell you, within 24 hours, she had a family tree and showed me who was who, and that was amazing.
Oh, yeah. Isn't it amazing what they can do? Thank you for their service, these search angels.
They truly are angels.
Yes, they are. So you have the family tree. Does that include your biological father?
Yes, it did. And he had 3 daughters, and they were all living.
Have you contacted them?
I have. I wasn't going to, I will tell you. I looked at everything and I thought, I have a family that I love. I have children, grandchildren, cousins, my siblings. I don't really I don't need that. That was my initial reaction. And then the more I thought about it, you never know. And listening to the podcast, you'd hear about all these happy reunions. And I thought, well, you can't have too many friends. So, and then my older son, like I said, he was very motivated to find some information. So I did decide after, it was probably a month into it, maybe 2 months, I decided I'll reach out. So I wrote a letter, and I wrote I wrote one letter, and I said, I got some DNA results, and I've found out, I've had some findings that you may want to know about. If you are not interested, it concerns you. And if you're not interested, please don't open. I will send another letter in a few days. Please don't open the second letter. And so I kind of gave them a little intro because I thought, gosh, how do you do this, without, and that's kind of what I came up with. And so then I sent the second letter. And in the second letter, I went into detail, and I used names and told about my family background, and how that I was primarily interested in the family health history, and that I would really be grateful for a photo, because I had no idea, and I couldn't find anything online because he died in 1976, I believe, the biological father. So, you never know. Well, wasn't long after that, I got a phone call from one of the sisters, the middle sister, and she was very upset. And she told me that I was wrong and that her father was better than that and that they were good people and she knew that didn't happen. And, a lot, and just really terrible feeling. So I said, well, I understand that. And as I said, because I had said in my letter, that basically the ball was in their court. And that I had reached out to them, and if I didn't hear from them, they wouldn't hear from me again. And so I said, as I said in my letter, I won't contact you again. And so, that was that. And then I got a phone call from who would be the oldest sister's husband. And he was so kind. He said, I wanted to let you know that my wife, the oldest sister, who I share a name with, interestingly enough, but she would be 17 years older than me. So big. Both sides had a big age difference. So he said, unfortunately, she's in a nursing home and she has dementia. But he said, I will share this with her. And so I told him I appreciate it. And he said, if you want to call me, if you have any questions. I asked a few things, and he didn't know a lot, because that's his in-laws. We hung up, and, I was so touched by that because, like my husband said, most people, he had no reason to reach out to me. Most people would have said, well, I can't do anything about that, and thrown the letter in the trash. But he was a good person, and he was concerned. He read between the lines, I guess, or maybe put himself in my shoes and thought, let me call her. So at least I got a response from her. And I would like to believe that she would have been open to at least having a conversation with me. So I felt really, really good about that. And then the third one, the younger sister, who is 6 years older than me, same age as my sister that I grew up with, her daughter contacted me because they were both on Ancestry. And I had reached out. So she contacted me and she said, I believe my mother will probably reach out to you in some time. We had no idea, but he worked for the railroad. She gave me a lot of background. He worked for the railroad, and she was assuming that's how they met, because the family lives near the Jacksonville area. And so the Jacksonville, that is part of the route. They would go from Jacksonville to Savannah, and then there's another town in Georgia, and they kind of made that loop. And so the men that were in Savannah, when they were in Jacksonville, they had they had time in between their routes. And so they were given a hotel room. They had time on their hands. And the same thing with the men coming from that area to Savannah. And that's probably what happened with me. So she gave me all of that. And that was helpful, because I could not determine, my mother was not the type of person. Now, here I go saying she wasn't the type of person, but she wasn't one who would hang out in bars or I just could not imagine how she would have met someone. So somehow, they connected. And so, I thought, well, I'll wait. So I kind of had the answer about, all three of them. And I never have heard from that youngest one, never have heard from her. But anyway, in the meantime, one of the nieces, the oldest sister's daughter, the one that I said I felt like would have been open, she contacted me because her father, the one who called me, she said he gave her all of my information, and she reached out to me and she sent me a picture. And that, my gosh, that was so emotional. And I can't even describe why. It was so emotional. It made it real. And I saw a little bit of me. I'd have to say I favored him more than I did my father who raised me. So there's that. But it was very emotional. And all of my, my children, my family, they all wanted to see him. They were all invested in this whole story and journey that I've been on. My siblings, all of my family, close friends. And we've been corresponding since then. And it's been really nice. She is a very, very sweet person. And so I've learned a lot about people through all of this too. Her daughter actually invited me to her wedding back in March, I think it was. And I went, and that youngest sister was there, and there was no contact.
Mm.
And so later, I did ask because I was curious. I asked the niece, my newly found niece. I said, "Did she know I was there?" And she said yes. And she said that she just couldn't accept her dad. It just was so hurtful for her that her dad did this, and she just couldn't accept this. So, that box was checked. So I feel like I've gotten answers from all three of them. They're not always the answers you want, but at least I got answers. But what was so funny about all of that, so I was telling when I went to that wedding, my siblings, all of my children, everyone was so curious. How did that go? How did that go? Did you meet that other sister? Well, and so I was talking to my oldest brother, and I said, well, I saw her, and she knew I was there, but I said she has said that she prefers not to get to know me. And I said, but that's okay because I know now. And that gives me some closure. And my oldest brother said, well, she's just your half sister. And I said, now, wait a minute. You're my half brother.
Yep.
But see, to him, I'm not.
Right.
And so that's what I learned. Some family is born by blood and some is born by love. And I think they're both so important. Oh, I did meet my older son who was wanting some answers. Before that niece reached out to me, he went on Ancestry and started sending out messages to people, and he got a response from a second cousin. And so her mother contacted me, and we have grown very close. And so the two sides of the family, that is their cousins. That's my cousins too, but they did not have anything to do. There were two brothers, and one brother was my biological father, and then one would have been my uncle. They did not really have much contact. The children didn't know each other. And what is so interesting is that side of the family, my uncle's side, they are so much like my family. They are, they're open. They were just so open to me. And, I've said this. It's a funny feeling when you find out you've got siblings and they treat you like you're not really a sibling. But the thing about it is, yes, I am a half sibling, but the bottom line is he's not a half father.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so there's no levels of being a child of someone, they either are or they're not. But there's that. And so that just kind of made me look at things differently. And it also gave me a lot of closure and peace because I thought many times about what I would do if I were faced with this same situation. And it's a little different. But say my father who raised me, if he had had a child and they showed up, I know what I would do. I would give them some photos. I would tell them his health history. And I know what all of my siblings would do. They would treat them with kindness. And I am not related to him, but I would still do that. Because I think that's what you should do.
Pat, it's so nice to listen to you and where you're at. Has there been anything that's been helpful for you with your healing process along the way?
Yes, I would recommend if you don't have strong family connections, find a group or do all of those. If you're lucky enough to have a strong family support system, then that's great. But a group still helps because no one really understands your journey unless they've been through it themselves. So I think all of the groups on social media are great, the podcast. I was devouring things like that, and it was so healing and affirming that, I'm not alone. Also, keeping a journal, that was very helpful. And then I did go back to work, and that helped me a lot because I was able to step away from this a little bit. And in my job, I'm able to actually help people. So that takes my mind off of it. And, the saying, the wounded becomes the healer. I found that to be, it's been very healing for me to be able to help others. So not in that same capacity, but, in my role, I'm able to be a helper.
Yes, we were talking before we started recording. Thank you for everyone that's in education, but you've been a principal, assistant principal, and now are you teaching English as a second language? You should explain this better than me.
Yes, I teach English as a second language to people that have moved here from other countries and they're learning English. And I have beginners class and I have an intermediate class. And so I get to, watch them as the beginners are able to move to the intermediate class and then the ones that get to leave and get employment or whatever their goals are. But I always say I get to travel to other countries every day without leaving my classroom because I learn from them. I learn a lot about their culture, but it's a very rewarding process too to see someone work so diligently to become a part of our system, our society, and just to learn and the way they learn and all of that. It's very interesting. There's no way I can think about any of this while I'm at work.
Right. Oh, how rewarding. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And Pat, if people wanted to contact you and ask you questions or send anything supportive your way, could they do that?
Sure.
Why don't you go ahead and repeat the email of your choosing?
Okay. My email is P, like my name, Pat, MCD 1974 at Gmail.
And I will link that down below. And Pat, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. I just really appreciate hearing it.
Thank you, Lily. I enjoyed hearing your story as well. And we all are a little different, but we all have some common characteristics, and we're here for each other, aren't we?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.